Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by Inner City Press. The courtroom wasn't ready for what happened next. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, global icon, former wrestling champ, blockbuster superstar, entered the courtroom with a face few had ever seen. Broken, vulnerable, scared. He wasn't there to promote a movie. He was there to confess. As he took the stand, he described a horrifying series of initiations that allegedly took place behind the scenes of his rise to fame. What shocked everyone wasn't just what he endured. It was who orchestrated it. Sean Diddy Combs. The Rock broke down in tears as he revealed Diddy's bizarre control over early Hollywood connections, including a twisted ritual that involved eating raw monkey brains, being locked in basements, and being forced to prove loyalty through humiliation. What Dwayne said under oath left the courtroom speechless. No one expected it. There was no announcement, no press warning, no whispers in the hallway. The courtroom had already been shaken by the testimonies of stars like Monique, Denzel Washington, and Jamie Foxx. But when the side door opened and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson walked in, the room didn't just freeze, it broke. Gone was the smiling, confident, motivational figure known to millions. This was not the man who clapped back on red carpets or hyped up fans in wrestling arenas. The man walking in now looked haunted, tired, hollow. His trademark brow furrowed, not in bravado, but in emotional pain. He carried no papers, no notes, just the weight of something he had never spoken aloud. Even Diddy, seated beside his defense team, turned and seemed to stiffen. His lawyers whispered in rapid fire, visibly caught off guard. Prosecutors, meanwhile, exchanged glances. They had kept this name quiet for a reason, because this moment was going to change everything. As Dwayne took the stand, he hesitated to sit. He placed both hands on the railing and looked at the judge. "May I say something before we begin?" The judge nodded. He faced the gallery, then turned to the jury, then to Diddy. "I don't want to be here, but I have to be. I've lived with something that's eaten away at me for almost 20 years. And the truth is, I'm still scared. But I'm more scared of what happens if I stay silent." The court went still. Dwayne was sworn in, then finally sat. His voice was low and gravelly, not from theatrics, but emotion barely contained. "You all know me as The Rock, the guy who never breaks, but I'm about to break now, and I need everyone in this room to understand. What I'm about to say isn't just about Sean Combs. It's about how he got away with it for so long." His lips quivered as he said it. "I was one of them. One of the ones who thought playing along meant survival. I played along, and I paid a price no one ever saw." And with that, the room, the trial, the entire cultural conversation shifted. Because Dwayne Johnson was about to describe a Hollywood initiation so bizarre, so humiliating, it would haunt every headline for years to come. The court leaned in as Dwayne Johnson began describing his first encounters with Diddy. "It was 2001. I was transitioning from wrestling to film. Scorpion King had just hit, and I was hungry, ambitious, but naive." He said Diddy appeared like a guardian angel, a connector, someone who had the power to open every door in Hollywood. "I didn't question it when he said, 'Let's talk off the record.' I thought it was just business." Dwayne detailed how Diddy invited him to industry nights, exclusive private gatherings hosted at his mansions in Los Angeles and Miami. They weren't wild parties at first. It was chill, champagne, handshakes, producers, studio people, casting directors. Everyone said, "Diddy's the guy." But over time, the energy changed. It stopped feeling like networking and started feeling like a test, Dwayne said. He'd say things like, "Are you down for greatness? Would you bleed for it?" I laughed it off, but his face didn't move. Then came the favors. Diddy would ask Dwayne to show up to parties at odd hours. Once he was told to arrive at a house in Bel Air at 2:13 a.m. He said that was when real decisions get made. Johnson showed up and was the only one there for over an hour, until a group of silent guests arrived in black suits, and no conversation was allowed. It was like a cult waiting for their leader. When Diddy entered, he allegedly turned down the lights and played audio through hidden speakers. It was Diddy's voice on loop asking, "Are you worthy? Are you ready? Would you eat what I feed you?" I thought it was art, Dwayne told the court. Some twisted, creative, motivational thing. I kept telling myself, it's just showbiz. These guys are eccentric. But deep down, I felt my gut screaming, something is wrong. Then came the first test. Diddy asked Dwayne to meet him alone at an undisclosed location outside LA. I wanted to say no, but my publicist said, "This could be the meeting that changes your life." Dwayne looked straight at the jury. Turns out, he was right. It changed everything. Just not how I thought. The moment Dwayne Johnson uttered the words, "monkey brains," the courtroom's energy shifted from stunned to horrified. He took a long pause before speaking. "This is the part I've never said out loud. Not to my wife, not to my friends, not even to my therapist." He described being driven blindfolded to a private residence on the outskirts of Los Angeles. I asked the driver where we were. He didn't answer. He just turned up the music. When they arrived, he was escorted by two men into a dark, candlelit room where the walls were draped in black cloth. The only light came from floor-level lanterns glowing red. Seated around a low table were 5 men in suits, all silent. And at the head of the table, Diddy, laughing, calm, holding a crystal goblet filled with something Dwayne said looked like oil. Then came the tray. It was brought out by a man in a white robe. They didn't announce it, just placed it in front of me and uncovered it. It was a steel plate. On it were pieces of raw monkey brain, still steaming, no seasoning, just tissue, wet, trembling. Dwayne looked down, voice breaking. Diddy said, "Everyone who's made it ate. Everyone who didn't, vanished." Then he told the men to look at me, said, "Let him feel the pressure." He said he tried to walk out, but the door was locked. I asked if this was a prank, a ritual. I even tried laughing, but no one laughed with me. Then Diddy handed him a spoon. He leaned in close and said, "Hollywood is not about talent, it's about obedience." At this point, Dwayne began to cry on the stand. I was scared. I was humiliated. And I was alone. With shaking hands, he lifted the spoon to his mouth and bit down. I don't remember the taste. I just remember the sound, the room laughing, the chewing, and then silence. He sat at that table for 30 minutes while they watched him finish the ritual. When it was over, Diddy reportedly stood up and clapped. "Welcome to level 2, he said. Dwayne looked at the jury again. I walked out of there feeling like a part of me had died. Not because of what I ate, but because of what I gave up to eat it. The courtroom was silent. because this wasn't just a story of abuse. It was a man revealing how far people are pushed when silence is the price of success. Dwayne Johnson's voice became steadier as he explained what came after the disturbing ritual. He described what he now recognized as psychological conditioning, meant not just to humiliate him, but to strip away his autonomy and reconstruct him into someone dependent on the approval of those in control. They started treating me differently, not better, just like I was one of them now. But at the same time, they needed to test that I'd stay quiet, that I'd obey. He recalled being invited to what he thought was a business retreat in a secluded desert estate. But when he arrived, he found no agents, no studio executives, only a handful of other entertainers, some early in their careers, some already prominent, all seemingly uncomfortable. Dwayne said they were placed in isolated rooms with no windows. Phones were taken. Music blared on a loop for hours. The only food came at unpredictable intervals, and they were given instructions to memorize strange scripts, chant affirmations about surrendering to the higher power of success, and to speak only when addressed. I thought it was performance training, maybe some eccentric workshop, but then it clicked. It was about submission. They wanted us to confuse fear with loyalty, confuse pain with progress. He paused. I didn't speak up because I thought maybe I was crazy, that if I told someone, they'd say I was overthinking it. But it wasn't just happening to me. We'd see each other in the hallway and give this look, like we were trapped in the same unspoken nightmare. Dwayne explained that after this experience, he noticed himself losing sleep, feeling paranoid, doubting who he was. It wasn't just about acting anymore. It felt like he was being conditioned, repurposed as a product molded by silent hands behind the curtain. They didn't need chains, just silence, confusion, and control. Dwayne Johnson then described what he referred to as the machine behind the curtain. According to his testimony, after participating in what he called the obedience trials, he was suddenly flooded with opportunities, but they came with strings. I started getting offers out of nowhere, films I wasn't even supposed to be considered for. People told me, "Diddy vouched for you." I didn't ask why. I was just grateful. He recalled one meeting with a major studio head. They didn't talk about my talent. They said, "We hear you're someone who plays the game." That's all that mattered. When Dwayne questioned certain contract terms or requested changes, he was often warned that his options could vanish if he didn't stay on good terms with certain people. I realized these weren't offers, they were assignments. He said Diddy held influence far beyond music. He wasn't just a producer. He had investments, relationships, stakes in companies, favors owed, and the unspoken rule was, if he wanted you blacklisted, it happened. Dwayne said he once declined an invite to an after-hours gathering and, the following week, his agent called to say a major studio pulled his name from a project at the last minute. That's when I knew. Silence wasn't just expected. It was mandatory. Even the people around him were cautious. My managers, my lawyers, they all knew where the lines were. Nobody wanted to speak his name unless it was with praise. He began to feel like a puppet, one whose strings were pulled not just by studios, but by invisible alliances held together by fear, favors, and secrets. You learn very quickly that the people who control access in Hollywood don't do it out in the open. It's done through whispers, favors, and debts. With a visible heaviness in his voice, Dwayne Johnson described the moment when he saw too much. when he decided he could no longer remain part of the circle he had been reluctantly ushered into. He recalled a private event at a luxury estate in the Hollywood Hills. He had been invited under the pretense of a private screening and industry networking night. But when I got there, I knew right away it wasn't that. The house was dimly lit, with security posted at every door. Phones were taken at the entrance. Guests were handed masks, not for theatrics, but for anonymity. It felt less like a party and more like an initiation. Not mine, but someone else's. He walked the perimeter of the event, uneasy. What he saw disturbed him. I saw people I admired, actors, musicians, even directors, behaving in ways that didn't look like celebration. They looked lost, like they were trying to prove something, or hide something. Dwayne said he saw a well-known younger actor crying in a hallway. He was clutching a drink, trembling. When I asked if he was okay, he said, "They told me this is what it takes." That was the night Dwayne left early. That was the night he said, "The glamour cracked, and I saw the machinery underneath." He went home and didn't sleep, not just because of what he saw, but because of the realization that he had been protected, at a cost. I wasn't invited because they liked me. I was invited because I was useful, because I had shown I could stay silent. He choked up as he added, "But seeing that young man, it made me remember who I was before all this, before the fear, before the shame." He looked at the judge and said, "That was the night I decided. If anyone ever asked me what I saw, I wouldn't lie." And now, on the witness stand, he kept that promise. As Dwayne Johnson sat on the stand, the courtroom remained painfully still. Every eye was locked on him, not because of his fame, but because of his truth. He took a breath and looked straight ahead. "People ask why we stay silent," he said. "Why actors, musicians, athletes, people with platforms don't speak up when we see things that aren't right." He looked down and sighed. "I'll tell you why. Because it's terrifying." He explained that for much of his early Hollywood career, he believed the best way to survive was to keep moving, smile, perform, and avoid questioning those in control. You're taught not to ruffle feathers, not to say names. You think, if I speak, I lose everything I built. He said his silence wasn't about guilt. It was about fear of retaliation, of being blackballed, of being labeled difficult or unreliable. It's not always threats. Sometimes it's just watching someone disappear, watching roles dry up, calls stop, contracts vanish. He referenced other actors who vanished from the spotlight after walking away from the inner circle. He said they weren't crazy or unstable. They were tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of being owned. Dwayne described the internal cost of keeping secrets. He said it made him anxious, isolated, unsure of who to trust. You feel like you're part of something you never signed up for. But leaving means burning bridges no one else will ever rebuild for you. He paused again, voice cracking slightly. And worst of all, you start to question whether you were complicit just by surviving. He nodded toward Cassie Ventura's legal team and added, "Seeing her come forward, that changed everything. It reminded me that silence protects the wrong people." As the courtroom watched Dwayne Johnson sit taller, more confident than before, he spoke not as The Rock, but as a man who had been reshaped by his experiences. There's this idea that once you make it, you're untouchable. That success means you're no longer vulnerable. But the truth is, the higher you climb, the harder it is to speak. He said he built a brand on strength, resilience, and positivity, but behind the scenes, he often felt powerless. I couldn't talk about what I saw, what I experienced, because it didn't fit the image. He admitted that, for years, he stayed silent because the cost of speaking seemed too great. But in recent years, especially as more survivors came forward in the industry, he began to see his silence differently. It stopped being self-preservation, he said. It started to feel like betrayal. He recalled a young fan once telling him, "You're the guy who never quits." And that sentence stuck with him, because, in some ways, he had quit. Quit on his younger self, his principles, and those who were still trapped in systems of power they didn't choose. Dwayne wiped away a tear. "I'm not testifying to cancel someone. I'm here because I've been silent long enough, and I don't want anyone who looks up to me to think silence is strength." He said this wasn't about blame. It was about accountability. And I want people in power to know, we see you now. You're not invisible anymore. The courtroom grew tense as Dwayne Johnson turned to face Sean "Diddy" Combs directly. "I want to say this to you, man to man," he began, "because I've carried it for too long." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture wildly. But his words cut deeper because of their calm conviction. "You made me believe I had to sacrifice myself to succeed, that I had to surrender my integrity just to be allowed in the room, and I believed it." He shook his head, eyes locked on Diddy. But that wasn't power. That was fear disguised as influence. He spoke about the others who had crossed paths with Diddy, the ones who hadn't found the strength to speak, the ones still suffering in silence. "I'm speaking for them now, for the people who were told they had no choice, who were told that dignity and dreams couldn't live in the same place." He paused. "You don't get to define my legacy. Not anymore." As he stepped down from the stand, his final words echoed in the hushed courtroom. "It ends here, with the truth." Dwayne left the courtroom not as a victim, not as a headline, but as someone who had reclaimed his story, no longer afraid, no longer silent. And the world watching knew. Something in Hollywood had just shifted. As the bailiff guided Dwayne Johnson away from the witness stand, a hushed ripple passed through the gallery. But before he stepped beyond the swinging courtroom doors, Dwayne paused. Not to look at Diddy, not to speak to the press, but to face the room one last time. "I want to leave one more thing on record," he said, voice resolute. "This story, my story, isn't just about me. It's not about stardom or scandals or headlines. It's about the people who never get to sit in this chair. The ones who didn't survive long enough to speak. The ones still stuck behind the curtain, terrified that no one will believe them." He turned slightly, addressing not just the jury, not just the judge, but the very culture that enabled the silence for so long. For decades, Hollywood has been built on a lie, on the myth that power justifies abuse, that success comes with a price we can't question. But that myth is breaking now. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth. He took a breath. "I stayed quiet because I was afraid I'd lose everything. But the truth is, I never had anything if I didn't have myself." A soft murmur of support broke out from one corner of the courtroom. Lawyers glanced around, unsure whether to intervene. The judge didn't stop him. Dwayne nodded once more. "To anyone out there watching this, still wondering if it's safe to speak up, let this moment be your signal. The silence is over. We're not afraid anymore." With that, he walked out of the courtroom. No cameras followed, No handlers rushed to spin a narrative. Just a man who finally chose to speak. And a system that, for the first time in a long time, had no idea how to silence him.